This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about Bitcoin FOMO is coming soon, fear of missing out on a big Bitcoin rally. If you're interested in learning how to make money in both bull and bear markets, or you just want to see what I'm trading or investing in, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Obviously, none of this is investment advice, but I'm highly invested in Bitcoin. And I've been getting a lot of messages from people saying, please stop talking about Bitcoin so much in your videos. And this normally comes from two types of people. There's one type, which is sort of the small group of people who say, I already own it and I own a lot of it, so I don't need to hear any more about it. And then there's another group that says, I don't own any, I never want to own any because it's a bubble and it's a scam and it's controlled by the US government, etc., etc. So it's really to the people in this class number two that I want to address today's video to. Now, Bitcoin just had its halving in May of 2020, and we're entering the most bullish part of the 4-year Bitcoin cycle. And what this means is that if Bitcoin is going to take off, it really is going to happen in the coming 12 to 18 months. If we look ahead at the Plan B model, it's projecting, we can see where we are here, this little red dot here. It's projecting by early next year for Bitcoin to be in the 30s or 40,000s, ultimately going up to 100,000 in this cycle and then into the millions beyond that. So I want to just go over a little bit where I think this demand is going to come from for Bitcoin. There's almost a guarantee that a Bitcoin ETF will be approved sometime in the next few years, probably sooner rather than later. There's a lot more regulatory acceptance of Bitcoin, even in 2020. And at this point, once we have a Bitcoin ETF, RIAs, registered investment advisors, I'm talking really about what happens in the US here where I'm most familiar with this, RIAs will start recommending a small allocation to Bitcoin once there's a Bitcoin ETF, just as they usually recommend a small allocation to something like gold. So even a 1% Bitcoin allocation, again, Bitcoin, the worst that can happen, it can go to zero. And so if you put 1% of your net worth in it, it's not going to blow things up too much if it goes to zero. And so RIAs will be very comfortable with this. RIAs currently manage about 4.7 trillion, as far as I can tell online. Just 1% of 4.7 trillion is $47 billion. Now, this is almost 25% of Bitcoin's current market cap, which is around 200 billion. Again, this would be an enormous amount of money to flow into Bitcoin. And the only way this can happen is at much higher prices. There's a huge percentage of Bitcoin holders like myself that are probably never going to sell their Bitcoin. I might consider selling a few Bitcoin at $1 million or $2 million per Bitcoin. But what's going to happen in order for these kind of allocations to come in, the price is going to have to adjust. And as the price goes up, Bitcoin's market cap will go up. And that will make it an investable asset for larger and larger institutional and government investors. Right now, at 200 billion, it's got a market cap sort of like a big S&P 500 stock. And so it's not really its own asset class yet. To put it in perspective, gold is something like 10 or 11 or 12 trillion dollars. And so Bitcoin is just this really small thing right now. But as it goes up, as more money goes in, the market cap goes up, it will allow bigger investors to invest in it. Not just high net worth individuals and wealthy people, but also things like pension funds. Pension funds will also start putting 1% in Bitcoin, especially when it becomes easier to custody in the sense that you'll be able to buy a Bitcoin ETF. CalPERS, which is the retirement fund for California employees, they're currently managing about 389 billion is what I found online. So if they just put 1% of their asset allocation into Bitcoin, that'd be another 3.89, almost $4 billion, or roughly 2% of Bitcoin's current market cap. Again, we're talking about just one employee retirement fund. And then you have companies, S&P 500 companies starting to put their money into their sort of corporate money, their treasury assets into Bitcoin. We've been getting the news out of MicroStrategy, which is a NASDAQ company, that they have currently put most of their cash holdings, I would say it's close, certainly above 90% of their cash holdings, into Bitcoin, about 425 million Bitcoin. And this is a real company, trades on the Nasdaq. And so if we start thinking about some of the big companies, especially the very tech savvy companies like Apple and Amazon, and the amount of cash they have on their balance sheets, if Apple were to put just 1% of its cash into Bitcoin, that'd be another 930 million, Amazon another 714 million. You can imagine pretty soon we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. And then the next step after that, once corporations have allocated to Bitcoin and Bitcoin's market cap is even bigger, at that point you get sovereign wealth funds beginning to own Bitcoin. These are big wealth funds that are managed for individual countries like Singapore or Norway are some famous ones. The Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is often called the oil fund because that's where they get their cash from, is they actually already own Bitcoin indirectly, simply because they happen to have an allocation, a very small allocation, to MicroStrategy's stock. And so this is just really the beginning of corporations and sovereign wealth funds owning Bitcoin. And then the next step after sovereign wealth funds owning Bitcoin, maybe they only put 0.5% or 1%, a very small amount. But at this point, Bitcoin's market cap is certainly above $1 trillion, up about 5x from where it is now, at about 200 billion. And at that point, and maybe even sooner, some global central banks may already own small amounts of Bitcoin. I wouldn't be surprised, especially the smarter, more nimble ones. But then there's a sort of game theory that takes effect that if one central bank owns some Bitcoin, you really need other central banks then they begin to suffer from fear of missing out, from FOMO, and they start buying it too. We do know that China and Russia have been sort of lightening up on treasuries, not really been marginal buyers of U.S. treasuries, which is sort of the traditional central bank reserve asset. Over the last few years, they've been scaling back their treasury purchases and buying gold instead. So it's very likely that one of these central banks, whether it's China, Russia, Singapore, start holding some of their reserves in Bitcoin. And so what we have right now is this incredible opportunity to front run all these big investors. This is the first time that I've ever seen it. It was true a little bit in the .com time, where a lot of retail mom and pop investors were kind of early to the tech stocks and the internet stocks, the .com stocks, to a certain extent. But I think it's even more true this time, where retail investors own more Bitcoin than Wall Street does, than institutional investors or professional investors. And so it's a really big opportunity. So here's what I think is going to happen, and we can see whether I'm totally crazy or whether some of this comes to pass. I think Bitcoin starts hitting new highs later this year, or certainly early next year, in the first quarter of next year. So it starts trading above 20,000. And once that happens, the FOMO is really going to accelerate, and things are going to start to get really crazy. You're going to start reading about Bitcoin every single day in the newspaper and on your online news websites. And what's going to happen, I'm going to predict what's going to happen in this audience in the YouTube channel. Basically, people are going to start to email me and drop comments when Bitcoin's at 20,000 or 25,000 or 30,000, asking me if it's too late to buy it. And again, I can't offer investment advice. I'm just not legally allowed to in the US. But what I do share is the way I approach the market and how I'm allocating my money. And I have the biggest allocation to Bitcoin that I'm able to do. If I didn't have a wife and kids, I can tell you I would sell everything. I would sell my car. I would sell all my real estate. I would move into a trailer park and I would put everything into Bitcoin. But I've got kids that are approaching college age, etc. I have certain real life responsibilities, as most of us do. But this is just to give you an idea of how bullish on Bitcoin I am right now. So people will be emailing me at 30,000, at 40,000, at 50,000, asking me if it's too late. And then we'll still have the naysayers who think Bitcoin's in a bubble at 11,000. And so then they'll be saying it's in a super, super bubble. These are the same people who have thought that Amazon's been in a bubble for the last 20 years. And they don't really sit back and think and, really define their terms. What they mean is that it just keeps going up a lot. But this is also the definition of a really good investment. a really good investment goes up a lot. So what's eventually going to happen is Bitcoin is going to get into the hundreds of thousands in this cycle. Plan B has a target of 288,000 in one of his models, which I'll link to the video where I discuss that. And so let's say I think there's a good chance that Bitcoin overshoots this target to the upside. It hits 300,000. And I think when we get up here in the hundreds of thousands, many of you who have been waiting will finally, and unfortunately, will finally rush out and buy Bitcoin. And that'll be the end of the 4-year cycle. Then we'll enter the more bearish third year of the cycle, or in the fourth year. And Bitcoin will peak when everyone who said were never going to buy Bitcoin, they finally buy it. And then we're going to have a nasty drawdown. Bitcoin's going to crash down 50% to 150,000. I'll get a lot of emails and comments telling me how irresponsible I was, what a disaster it is, how this is the end of Bitcoin. I still get these emails when Bitcoin falls from 11,000 to 10,000. I usually get 20 or 30 emails telling me what a disaster it is. But this will be ironic, because even if Bitcoin crashes back down, unfortunately most people will buy it near the peaks, and then when it crashes down, they won't have the conviction. They won't have watched all my videos and really studied Bitcoin, because it's so volatile and it's so weird and new that you really have to understand it to have the conviction. You can't just buy it because I'm buying it or because your friend's buying it. You're going to need the conviction to watch it move around a lot. Even if you just put 1% of your savings in it, it's still quite crazy to watch. And so we'll have this huge crash when it crashes from, say, $300,000 down to $150,000, and the death of Bitcoin will be scattered all over the headlines. But ironically, it will still be up about 14x from today's price, and it will be on its way to trading in the multi-millions. I think in the next 20 years, it'd be very easy, especially combining it with some dollar devaluation, to see Bitcoin prices of $5 or $10 or $15 million per Bitcoin. Even without the dollar going down a lot, I still think we get into the millions with Bitcoin. I will link to the stock to flow chart so you can kind of take a look at that model. We've already talked about MicroStrategy is really the first big corporation to jump into Bitcoin. I wanted to end with a kind of putting Bitcoin's market cap into context. This is from Ecoinometrics. I think it's a good way of sort of visualizing at what Bitcoin price the market cap of Bitcoin is equal to certain things. So Bitcoin, let's say it's currently at this has it at 12,000. It's currently closer to 11,000. Bitcoin at 16,000 is equal to the market cap of JP Morgan. At 40,000, it's equal to the market cap of Facebook. And we are talking about something that has the potential to be the new world reserve currency asset. And so it should have a much larger market cap if it succeeds than any of these tech companies. The market cap of Bitcoin will be equal to that at Apple at about 100,000, 106,000. And then gold, depending what happens with gold, Bitcoin will reach gold's market cap at 487,000. And it will be up to the current US M2 money supply when Bitcoin reaches close to 1 million. Of course, at that point, the US money supply will have grown much, much higher due to Fed money printing. And so it may still be below that. But I think this is where, once Bitcoin reaches the market cap of something like gold in the, around 10 trillion or wherever, maybe gold has moved up at that point as well. This is when you start getting countries and governments getting very worried about Bitcoin and maybe clamping down on it, maybe trying to attack it with some sort of cyber attack or 51% attack. But I think we have very smooth sailing until we get into the at least around $400,000, $500,000 per Bitcoin. I don't think it's on anyone's radar in Washington, D.C. as being a threat to the current economic system. But make no mistake, Bitcoin is a vortex, and it'll eventually pull everyone and everything into it, if I'm correct. And the last thing I would end on is, in 10 years from now, it's my belief that every single one of you who's watching this video is actually going to own some Bitcoin, whether indirectly in a employee retirement plan, in some sort of portfolio. Maybe you'll own some Apple stock and Apple will own some Bitcoin, or maybe you'll own it directly as well. So really consider this opportunity. I may be crazy. I may be wrong. Bitcoin could go to zero, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think all the signs point to much, much higher Bitcoin prices. And I don't know of any other asset or any other investment where you can easily get 10, 20, 100x over the coming years. There really isn't an asset that I can think of. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. And thanks a lot for listening. I'll see you in the next video.